Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring the King George V, aka the KGV, or King George as I will simply call it. So I'm pretty sure all of you will understand what ship I mean. Now, this ship is actually one that I really disliked on my first impressions, which is why I'm glad I kind of stuck with it and I played it more. Well, we'll start with the obvious. If you look at the guns, you might note that it has a really weird turret setup. It has two quad turrets, meaning turrets with 4 guns. It's got one in the front, one in the back, and then it has a third turret in the front that only has 2 guns. So it goes 4-4 in terms of gun setup. And well, this of course already makes it a bit strange. But ultimately though, it does have 10 guns, which is nice. The caliber, however, is only 356. Now this is very important because 356mm guns are not capable of overmatching 25mm armor. And 25mm armor is of course the magical threshold that pretty much all battleships around tier 7 have. We're talking Nagato, Colorado, even Gneisenau and Scharnhorst. All of them have this 25mm armor on the bow, or even either the entire bow, or in the case of the German battleships, the upper part of the bow. Regardless though, so you need something like, you need more. 380mm guns, for example, can overmatch it, but these 356s cannot. So this is of course a weakness, especially since the ship itself also has a 25mm bow. So this means that all other battleships can overmatch this ship, but you cannot overmatch any other battleships of your own tier, and well, not really any lower tier ones either. So first idea is the AP is pretty shit, but the AP does have some good uses against, cruisers. So what I started realizing with this ship is that this ship is insanely picky about what ammunition type you use. You have to be using, if you want the maximum performance out of this ship, well, using AP against cruisers, that's pretty obvious. And I did think this ship was pretty good against cruisers, but I did struggle to deal with the battleships. And now the obvious solution was obviously HE, but it did leave me thinking, like, had they figured this thing out, or had they considered this at all? And I started looking at the fire chances of the different ships, and the Queen Elizabeth, the tier 6, has a 35% fire chance. The Monarch, the tier 8, has a 35% fire chance. This one, the King George, has a 41% fire chance. Now combine this with the fact that it has a slightly faster reload than the other ships because of the smaller caliber guns, and the fact that it has 10 guns, and suddenly you realize that this King George is no slouch when it comes to dealing with battleship. The thing is, you kind of have to run HE though, because if anyone angles against you, well, let's have a good in-game example here. This Colorado, I'm trying to get there as quickly as possible, but this ship kind of blocks me. But the Colorado is turning away. I tried to aim really high so that I would hit his superstructure and get some AP pins. But using AP on any same tier ship, well, I only hit 2 shells, but both of them bounced. So AP is completely worthless against same tier battleships. Like, you literally have to get a flat broadside, or you have to get extremely lucky. I've really cursed this AP, but once I started realizing that how strong the HE was, the cursing kind of ended quite quickly, because well, as soon as I switched to HE, well, that was only what, 4 hits, instant 7.5k damage plus a fire, and that wasn't even anywhere near the max damage you can deal. I will show you guys later in this commentary just how much damage you can deal with this ship. But the HE is very fearsome against battleships, because of course they cannot angle, well, you can't angle against them because they can overmatch you, but they can't angle against you because your HE is so very strong. So there's kind of this balance going on in that sense. This Scharnhorst, there's a good example. Here we have a completely full HP Scharnhorst. I'm trying to reverse, of course, to turn my ship around. It's faster to turn your entire ship than just turn your guns, especially on Royal Navy ships. This one, of course, has a fairly slow turret traverse as well. And I'm hoping this Bayern will start moving. He's not, but let's see what damage we get. 14,000 damage with HE on a Scharnhorst. That is certainly no joke. Okay, this Bayern still isn't moving, so I guess he doesn't want to move, so I'll accelerate instead. But now it looks like the Bayern does want to move after all, and he is kinda in my way, which is a bit annoying because the Scharnhorst damage conned and I really want to shoot him. So I'm trying to get some distance between me and him so I can maybe shoot this Scharnhorst. And of course, one or two of the shells clip the Bayern and set him on fire. That kind of sums up my luck right there. Not just the fact that this couple of shells hit him, but the fact that I got an instant fire on my teammate, and now it's ticking and he's not damage conning the fire. So I'm gonna get a nice, beautiful pink color from this game, simply because, well, I really wanted to shoot the guy who had used his damage con and set him on fire. I did get him on fire, so it did work out in that sense. The problem is because of this unidentified error guy, well, I can't really blame him when it's, well, I can kind of blame the fact that he wasn't moving. I don't understand why he's moving. He's losing a bunch of HP because he wasn't moving, but I did become pink from this, so that's a pretty, at least I don't have to answer the question in this commentary, Flamu, why are you pink? Because everyone knows exactly how I got pink in this game. The Scharnhorst does try to angle against me, but you can't really angle against this HE, and I do set a second fire, which is exactly what I wanted. Now you might note that I've been tanking a lot of this damage here. I've been eating and tanking a lot of it, and the broadside armor on the King George is actually no joke at all. I did say thank you. I'm not entirely certain if I said thank you to the Bayern, if I said thank you to Wargaming for allowing one shell to turn you pink if you get unlucky enough to get a fire, or if I said thank you to the RNG gods who decided that the one or two hits that hit him would set me on fire. But regardless, that was of course annoying. Still though, this kind of shows the broadside armor. The King George actually has a pretty insane broadside armor. It has a 381mm armor. You saw that AP? That bounced. If we take an example, the Scharnhorst, they have something like, I think, 350mm broadside armor. Ships like the, or is it 340? I switched to AP here because he's giving broadside, and these are of course the cases where the AP is very strong if they give flat broadsides like this. And of course I was planning on switching to the cruiser anyway, so having AP loaded already is very, very strong. Royal Navy cruisers giving broadside, well, I hardly need to explain what is going to happen here, especially with Royal Navy AP. That is especially potent, or especially reliable when it comes to dealing citadels. So that Royal Navy cruiser dies and the Scharnhorst burns to death. That would have been of course a double strike if I actually could get any of those achievements, but since these are test ships I'm not able to get them. Returning back, you see that line that goes down my broadside? There's like this indentation that actually displays how high up the broadside that armor comes. You see the line that goes down my broadside, the length of my ship? That is all the way how far up the broadside armor comes. So it actually shows to everyone. So if you're shooting at this ship and you know you can't pen the 381mm armor, you have to aim above that line. So that's a pretty easy way of telling where you should shoot at this ship. But returning back to the armor, it is very, very good. Because I think Colorado has like 350, I think the German battleships have something like 340, 350 as well, but no one even comes close to this 381mm armor. So the broadside is very strong on this ship. Another point in favor of this ship is that the Citadel in Royal Navy fashion is completely underwater, completely submerged. You have pretty much no chances of hitting this Citadel at all. I will show you in the port after this game just what the Citadel looks like, and you'll understand what I mean, that this ship is pretty much impossible to Citadel. Let's see, AP on an angled battleship. Yeah, that's kinda my point. This ship, as I said, I really disliked this ship at first because the AP performance against battleships is so very terrible. But this ship is demanding. This ship is very shell type demanding. In fact, this is one of those ships that probably prompted me the most to consider running expert loader, and I don't think running expert loader would necessarily be a bad idea on this ship, because well, you really want to have the right ammo type for the right situation. This is not a Colorado or a Nagata where you just shoot AP at everything and you deal just as much damage as, well, you kind of don't really care too much about the angling, and even if they angle, you can still deal decent damage. No, this ship deals pretty much no damage against angled targets. That was a very lucky plunging fire volley that somehow dealt 10k to him, which is honestly very surprising, but I'll take it happily. And oh, talking about the ship though, what are the strengths besides, of course, this great HE and the fact that it has 10 guns with a good reload, is the fact that it has some great concealment in Royal Navy style. It has 12.2 km concealment, which makes it quite stealthy in general. What are the downsides of this ship? Well, the anti-air is very short range. This is a Royal Navy thing that kind of hounds this line until you get very, very high tier, tier 9, tier 10. Tier 8, it's still pretty sketchy, the anti-air, and you kind of have to reach the really high tiers. Until then, the AA is extremely long range, and unless you specifically spec for the range, the anti-air is generally going to be quite useless. Another weakness of this line, or of this ship, is the fact that it's clad in 25mm of armor all over. The front, the bow, the stern, the deck, it's all 25mm. If you compare it to something like the Scharnhorst, for example, where the top middle deck is 50mm, I think the Gneisenau has this, like many other battleships have stronger armor in the middle. This one doesn't, it's 25mm all over. And of course, 25mm can get matched by Gneisenau, Bismarck, Amagi, Nagato, Colorado, all of these. Anything 380 and above will match it. So that means other battleships can match your bow, your stern, and your deck armor. So long-range plunging fire, or just any sort of long-range hits that don't hit that tanky broadside of yours, are going to be dealing pretty much guaranteed penetrations. So you will be eating a lot of damage in this one. Luckily though, you're not that easy to Citadel, and you do have the stealth to disengage, and this one doesn't have any super heals. The super heals only kick in at tier 9 and 10. So you might end up in situations where you have to play it quite safe in general to make sure, well, you'll have to disengage and heal up. It happens. The good thing is, of course, that you can heal 50 or 60% of normal penetrations on the Royal Navy ships. So as long as you're not eating citadels or torpedoes, you'll be able to heal up a lot of the damage you take. Naturally, of course, having this 25mm armor all over also means that HE spam is a very, very real threat to you. All sorts of HE spam will be an issue for you, and well, if you do happen to get focused by it, you will notice just how much damage you take. So these are very real. These are some of the downsides of the ship, and of course, well, I already mentioned the gun type. You have to always use the right ammo type, and when you end up using the wrong one, well, you don't really do too much, which is quite annoying. The speed on the ship isn't that bad. I think it's 28 knots, and overall, in terms of strength of the ship, well, based on my first few impressions, I kind of rated it as one of the worst tier 7s, but after I'd kind of gotten used to how much you need to cycle ammunition all the time and how much you need to, this ship greatly rewards planning in advance. You kind of want to, as soon as you fire, you already want to know what type of ammo you should be switching to and what type of ammo you should be using. Of course, there are times when this ends up being like quite frustrating. You switch to HE and a cruiser pops up full broadside, or you switch to AP and the battleship starts angling and you have no good targets to shoot at. These things do happen. So this ship is certainly more situational than the average battleship because of this weakness of the AP. But in return though, faster reload, 10 guns, and the dispersion is quite good. And honestly, the HE is kind of a safe bet, but of course you've seen just how many devastating huge strikes I've done to cruisers with the AP, so sticking only to HE would be doing the King George V a huge disservice. Overall though, I think the range is 18.1, or was it 17.8? Something like that. It's around 18 km, so the range is pretty good. The concealment is of course very good. The torpedo belt though is like 24%, but I don't think really any tier 7 has particularly good of a torpedo belt, so it's kind of in the middle of the pack. Maneuverability is decent. It's not gonna like break any records, but it doesn't feel like a brick either. and well, the Fuso is staying angled towards me, and of course, as long as he stays angled towards me, I keep using HE. I'm gonna see if I could maybe get a Kraken for myself here. Let's see. He is turning. Getting another fire. The fire chance is of course 41%, and with this many shells landing, you deal not only just constant heavy HE damage, but also this massive fire chance. The game does end, and sadly the Scharnhorst Torps do kill him. Looking at the damage though, 223,000, which I consider very, very good for a tier 7 battleship. And it reminds me of some of my bigger Scharnhorst carries, so this is a very good number. Looking at the damage, of course, we see the kind of spread that you will kind of see when you have good games in the King George, and that is of course a very big, or a huge amount of fires and also citadels. This kind of tends to even out. You get a lot of the both. You will rarely have a game where you have no fires, and rarely have a game where you have no citadels either. Well, of course that can happen if you don't get to shoot any cruisers, but in general it's kind of balanced. This ship is very demanding on the ammo type. Looking on basic speed, 2.6k, which is of course nice. Shame I didn't get the Kraken, but you cannot really get it all. Overall though, a very good game, and now I'm a very nice fetching pink color. However, I already got rid of my team killer status yesterday, which was very nice since, well, it took me like 5 games to get rid of it, but of course it was kind of annoying to get it because of being unlucky enough to start a fire on a teammate. Looking at damage dealt. Well, first of all, well, there we have the damage dealt to a friendly. That's, of course, the fire that dealt pretty much all the damage to him. But looking at the damage dealt, we can see pretty flat, even numbers to the cruisers, like 27k Nuremberg, 24k Emerald. These are the ones that got insta-devastated. And then we have a lot of HE spam on Scharnhorst, Fuso. And this is kind of how it goes. Looking at the damage dealt, we have almost 70k HE, 111k AP, and then we have 42k fires on top. So ultimately, if you add those together, you realize I did pretty much exactly 50% fire and 50% HE and 50% AP, or 50% HE plus fires. You understand what I mean though. Potential damage 2.2. This can be both higher and lower, depending, of course. If you get a lot of unfortunate pens on your deck and bow, you will be hitting a lot more damage. If you manage to tank it on your great, fantastic broadside, well, then of course the number will go up and you will survive. Damage received 73k. So this, considering I have 60k health, this would have been a dreadnought game as well. So overall, quite a good game. Like, this would have been quite a rewarding game. But let me move on to my, well, first of all, I'll show you the Citadel, the camo, and so far my recommended build for the King George 5. Alright, as usual, I will start off with the modules. Now, the King George doesn't actually gain too many benefits from getting the hull upgrade. The hull upgrade actually only gives it a chunk of health and a bit of anti-air. It gives you mostly some anti-air range, but the trade-offs aren't really that massive. The biggest difference really is the health bonus. So personally, I would prefer getting the range first, because 16.5 is pretty anemic at tier 7, so get the range upgrade first, so you got that 18 km range, then follow it up with the hull upgrade, and finally get the engine upgrade, because the engine upgrade also isn't that large. It's only 1.4 knots, which is of course nice, but once again not that big of a deal. So range, hull, engine. Consumable wise, premium damage control, and I would recommend a premium heal as well. This is of course no super heal, but having an additional heal and on a shorter cooldown is extremely important for any battleship, not just the British ones. And finally, if you can afford it, run the spotting aircraft for smoke firing, because well, you got 10 guns, so obviously smoke firing against Royal Navy cruisers becomes quite a real thing. Upgrade wise, I prefer running main armaments mod 1, because these flat turret faces means once again we lose turrets quite easily, and aiming systems for better dispersion. AA guns mod I guess would be an option if you have to deal with a lot of carrier play, because if you do increase the AA range and if you go AFT on your captain, this ship does have some pretty decent anti-air, because this mid-range is pretty okay, the long range isn't that bad either. but you can't really turn it into some sort of Gneiser now, like a no-fly zone. So ultimately I didn't even bother attempting to become some semi-fly zone that really wouldn't be that strong in the end, and I preferred just going for the better dispersion. And I went tankiness 1 and 2. Rudder shift is okay at 15 seconds. You could improve it, but personally I prefer the additional tankiness, especially since, as I mentioned earlier, the HE is a weakness to this ship as many other Royal Navy ships because of the thin armor. Captain perks wise, I am running Jack Dunkirk. Of course, he's my go-to captain on all Royal Navy ships. I do hope you guys unlocked him because he is such a fantastic one. Priority 1 is of course preventive maintenance. This is in my opinion a first pick for all Royal Navy ships because of these flat turret faces. Followed up by turret traverse. With Jack Dunkirk you can at least get the turret traverse down to this 36 seconds, which is pretty okay. Additional heal and concealment. Once again, this is a strength on the Royal Navy ships. We want to get the most out of this concealment bonus by speccing into it. Get adrenaline rush. And then we can spec into Jack of all trades, which is once again better on Jack Dunkirk. And once we have this, we go fire prevention to help us against the HE spam and carriers. And finally, priority target, because, well, knowing who's aiming at you is of course always useful as a final perk point. Flag-wise, just like on all battleships, going for the heal flag and the reduction in fire duration are fantastic. And to further emphasize the usage of Jack Dunkirk's Jack of all trades, we get November Foxtrot to further reduce the cooldown of consumables. Anything on top of this is a bonus, like speed flag and the secondaries anti-air. These are all kind of things you can add, but you're not really that important. Anyway, that was my kind of first impressions. I don't know how much of a first impressions because I've been playing the King George quite a lot, and at first I absolutely hated this ship, but after getting to understand the quirks and the strengths and the weaknesses of this ship, I have to say it is quite strong. It's just extremely dependent on always having the correct ammo type selected, and I don't necessarily mind that. I don't mind a ship that demands good play from the captain in order to perform well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some questionable stats on this ship when people are kind of struggling to figure out what kind of stuff they want to run. But I have quite enjoyed it. One last thing, I'll show you of course the camo. This is the premium camo on it. Not actually that bad looking. I mean it is pretty bland, but it's actually not that bad looking. I quite like the Royal Navy premium camos, even if they are a bit bland. They are at least not ugly at all. They are quite nice looking. And finally, of course, the Citadel I mentioned. By the way, someone on my Discord mentioned that he would love for me to show the Citadels when I'm in a port that actually has water instead of dry dock, so you can actually see how low below the water it is, because not everyone is as used to watching the ships in the dry dock as I am, and that's some good feedback. If you got feedback like that, let me know in my Discord. I actually have a channel on my Discord that says feedback, and there you can leave some good useful tips like that. And that, for example, is a great idea for feedback. So let me show you guys. First of all, here's the belt that I mentioned that extends very, very high up the side, 381 millimeters, and you see how high up the broadside it extends. This is of course a huge strength and very, very useful. And finally we have the Citadel, and this is how low in the water the Citadel sits. You can see the water line and you can see just how low below it. So hitting the Citadel is extremely hard. You need some serious long-range plunging fire to even reach it, and this seems to be a theme for all the Royal Navy ships, and this of course makes it extremely hard to hit this, which is one of the strengths of this ship. Combined with this broadside, is that getting Citadels on this ship is going to be a real challenge. Anyway, that was my King George commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it.